Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
Later in the pod, Dan's interview with Stacey Abrams, who just launched a new effort to protect voting rights in the 2020 election. Before that, we will try to assess the damage from the president's latest meltdown, which, even by Donald Trump standards, was one for the ages this week. Also, check out Pod Save the World, where Tommy and Ben talk about how Trump bullied Netanyahu into blocking Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib from visiting Israel. They speak with a China expert from Human Rights Watch about the massive protests in Hong Kong, issue a call to action in defense of California wine. That's a very Tommy topic. And explain why Al-Qaeda released a blooper reel. Wow. Check it out. Finally, in the latest episode of our... Tommy's promos for Pod Save the World are just fire, I have to say. Finally, in the latest episode of our Crooked mini-series, Rigging North Carolina, our political director, Shaniqua McClendon, examines the bonkers hearing the North Carolina State Board of Elections held earlier this year to get to the bottom of what happened in the congressional race for the 9th District. All right, let's get to the news. So at one point yesterday, these are the 4 headlines that ran on the front page of the New York Times. New rule would let U.S. hold
Trump urges unity against racism?
Yeah, right. Not that one.
Okay.
They've moved past that. Here they are. New rule would let U.S. hold migrant families indefinitely. NRA gets results in one phone call with the president. Trump accuses Jewish Democrats of disloyalty. And Trump canceled a meeting with Denmark over its refusal to sell Greenland. Michelle Goldberg, a columnist at the Times, posted a photo of the front page and tweeted that it looked like one of those pre-election parodies about what a Trump administration would be like. And the worst part is, those headlines just scratch the surface of all the unhinged, nasty, destructive shit the president said and did last week. Dan, we're going to dig into these headlines one by one, but I want to start by asking you about a theory that I've been hearing from our old pal David Axelrod, which is that the voters that Trump needs to win are getting exhausted by waking up to this constant chaos and craziness day after day, and it is sort of damaging his political standing with probably some of the voters he would need to win in 2020. What do you think of that theory?
I mean, there's definitely some merit to it. I'd like to see, research that suggests it. I saw Amy Chozick of the New York Times tweet this morning, when is a Democrat going to run on the platform of make America boring again?
Yeah.
And I get that idea. I think Michael Bennett also said this, which is, wouldn't it be great if you had a president you have to think about 24/7? I do think that Trump, I would actually take Axelrod's theory and take it in a less optimistic direction, which is, the result of Trump exhausting the American electorate is not that people will vote against him. It is that some people won't vote.
Right.
Is that it is so loud, so annoying, so terrible, so miserable that they would rather check out than tune in. And if that happens, that is going to hurt Democrats because we depend on folks who have never voted before or are less frequent voters to get the majorities we need to win the Electoral College, while Republicans have a smaller but more reliable voting base.
I think you have to connect the argument to what really matters in people's lives. Because if the argument is just, we have a crazy president, and every time you turn the news, he's done something else, batshit crazy, then a lot of people could either, like you said, say, well, then I don't want to vote either way, or just turn off the news. But I think if you frame it as, this country has enormous problems. Climate change, your healthcare costs are going up, your wages have been stagnant, you're having a tough time sending your kids to college, and we have all these problems, and what is the president doing the whole time? He's just spouting off every other day, pissing some people off, pissing off foreign leaders, inciting hate and violence. He's just making the country more divided. He's profiting off the White House. He's doing all this bullshit while all of these problems that we have as a country are growing and no one is actually fighting for you. So I think if you connect it, it can be powerful, but I think it can't just be Donald Trump's, annoying on Twitter, and that's why we should have a new president.
Yeah, I think that you make a very important point here, which is you have to connect it to there have to be consequences for his behavior in your life, like either things that have gone wrong or missed opportunities to make the country better. I do think that there is an opportunity for a Democrat not to run on being boring, but to basically connect the dots on everything that Trump is doing and saying is that it's about Trump.
Yeah.
Right. These are his grievances, his fights, his temper tantrums, his bottom line when it comes to his economic policies and his corruption. And to say, have a message that's something like, wouldn't it be nice if we had a president who woke up every day thinking about you, not thinking about themselves, who was fighting for you, not fighting everyone for themselves, right? I think there's room for a candidate to do that. And I think that is the key to tie this all together. And I don't think Axe is suggesting this, but boring is not a way to win an election when your party depends on inspiring non-voters to vote.
Yep, I agree with that. So let's start with Greenland, a Danish island that was minding its own business until Donald Trump offered to buy it for at least $600 million of our tax dollars per year. When the Prime Minister of Denmark called the president's offer absurd, Trump called her nasty and canceled his upcoming visit to Denmark and attacked the country's NATO contributions on Twitter, successfully pissing off yet another close ally of the United States. Dan, I never thought I'd be asking this question, but why did President Donald Trump get in a fight with the Danish Prime Minister over his offer to buy Greenland?
We have come to expect the unexpected in the Trump era, but I have to admit, this one threw me for a loop.
Didn't see this one coming.
So insane. I mean, it's so crazy. It's just like, you just hear it, and you're just like, what the fuck? How did we get here? And it's not even like things are going superb all around the country right now. We're just like looking for new things to do. That Trump has just checked everything off of his list, and the economy's humming. Congress is passing things. People aren't getting killed in mass shootings, and it's like, I just need a new project, so I'm going to take on the Greenland thing. And so it's absurd in the best of times. It is incredibly absurd in the middle of this week, which has felt just on the events, or I'd say this summer, which has felt particularly chaotic and traumatic and scary, even by the scale of that in the Trump era. And so it's just like, I don't really know what to say other than Trump has an amazing ability to take the political conversation and focus it on the stupidest part humanly possible.
And I mean, we should talk for a second about why he wanted to buy Greenland. He's not the first president, believe it or not, to inquire about purchasing Greenland. I think Harry Truman did. A couple other presidents did in the past. You know, a legitimate reason could be, there's a geostrategic sort of, there's like a geostrategic reason for this. That Greenland is by Russia and you could have military bases there, which, by the way, you could have military presence there through NATO without actually buying the fucking island. But for Trump, we know why Trump wants to buy Greenland, right? He considers himself like a real estate guy and a builder. And if he could be the president that, added an entire island to America and say that he increased the size of the United States by 20%, you could see him being excited to brag about that, because it's exactly the type of fucking thing that Donald Trump gets excited about.
Did you have Spencer's gift stores growing up?
I did, yeah. Loved Spencer's Gifts.
So for folks who may not have been around in those days, Spencer's Gifts is this classic 80s store in malls that sold posters and gag gifts and T-shirts from bands. And I remember at the Spencer's Gift in the Concord Mall in Wilmington, Delaware, they always had this poster up that was this dude. I think he was in tennis shorts, and he was surrounded by a Ferrari and all this other stuff. And it said at the bottom, and this is the most quintessentially 80s thing, which is, he who dies with the most toys wins. And I've always thought that is Trump, who is himself a man trapped in the 80s. That is his ethos. That is his reason for being. And so buying stuff or getting more land in the United States is to him equals success. Without any thought of anything other, the purchase or the acquisition or possession of something is in and of itself a win, regardless of what you're using it for or what purpose it would serve.
Yeah, he's also one of these guys who's clearly only looked at Mercator maps that make Greenland look 5 times bigger than it actually is, And so he sees it on that fucking map and he's thinking to himself, holy shit, that's big. I want to buy that island. Now, the bad reasons for trying to buy Greenland, which there are many, but one of the worst is he basically just wants to fucking drill, There's like plenty of oil and natural resources there. And, it's inhabited by about 50,000 people. A lot of them are, they're indigenous people in Greenland. And he basically wants to go into their home and drill for a bunch of fucking oil and realize that, with climate change happening, Greenland is also, like, the ice on Greenland is melting. So it's a perfect opportunity not to solve climate change, but to drill for more fucking oil there. Now, the most ridiculous thing of this whole offer is that he can't buy Greenland even if the Danes said yes, because they are not able to sell Greenland. There is something in the Constitution that says that if Greenland wants to separate from Denmark or go somewhere else or be on its own, it's the people of Greenland that decide in a referendum. They vote. So it is also so Trump to think that it's so fucking colonial of him to think he can just pay some money for a territory that is able to, that if it ever wanted to leave Denmark, in the Constitution says that it can vote for it, it can decide that on its own.
What was it that Dinesh D'Souza or Newt Gingrich or some other right-wing nutjob said about Obama, that he had a neo-colonial attitude? Yeah, I think that it always comes full circle in the Trump world, where basically Trump becomes the absurd thing that conservatives accused Obama of being, then they embrace it.
Yeah, and let's also not let slide here that the consequence of what happened this week is that we just pissed off another NATO ally, which Trump has been doing left and right, sucks up to every dictator all over the world and just pisses off our allies. Denmark, small little country in Europe, also, sent troops to Afghanistan after 9/11 to support us because, we invoked Article 5 in NATO, lost 43 soldiers in Afghanistan, which is the highest per capita death rate of any member of the coalition fighting in Afghanistan, Denmark. And Donald Trump said, fuck you, because you wouldn't accept my offer to buy an island that I actually can't buy anyway. That's where we're at.
Would you support the acquisition of Greenland if it became a state?
Well, their politics are pretty left wing, so maybe we'd get another. See, Elijah's looking at me. This is where he's been going all week. 2 senators from Greenland, two Democrats. Absolutely. Well, again, if the people of Greenland want to decide that for themselves, then it's up to them. Okay. Next up on the crazy train. Multiple times this week, the president accused American Jews who support Democrats of being disloyal to Israel. Trump first made the anti-Semitic accusation as he was attacking Congresswomen Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who the president successfully lobbied Bibi Netanyahu to ban from Israel of being anti-Semites. On top of that, Trump tweeted the following quote from right-wing conspiracy theorist Wayne Allen, who believes the mass shooting in Las Vegas was a Muslim plot. Quote, "The Jewish people in Israel love Trump like he's the king of Israel. They love him like he is the second coming of God. But American Jews don't know him or like him. They don't even know what they're doing or saying anymore." This was a tweet thread from the President of the United States. Dan, should we go through all the ways these comments aren't just stupid and offensive and anti-Semitic, but actually dangerous?
Well, I mean, Trump using an anti-Semitic trope to call Democrats anti-Semitic is Trumpism.
Peak
in
Trump.
A nutshell.
Yeah.
It speaks to his stupidity. It also speaks of the willful stupidity of the Republican Party, who had a fucking hissy fit attacking Ilhan Omar for suggesting that her comments were about loyalty, and that she was using this exact same anti-Semitic trope that Trump just used. And then all of the people who attacked Ilhan Omar all defended Trump for it. It's like the price of being in the Republican Party in the Trump era is that you have to make yourself look ridiculous 3 times a week.
It's also very Trump in that the typical dual loyalty trope is that somehow American Jews aren't really loyal to America, they're loyal to Israel. In Donald Trump's mind, American Jews should be loyal to Israel, which means he doesn't really see American Jews as Americans, right? It fits with his like ethno-nationalist worldview, where he sees so many people in this country as not really truly being American. But if you're ethnic or you're Muslim or you're Latino, you have a Judge Curiel, the judge that he said couldn't be fair because he was Mexican, even though it was just like he was born in the United States and he had Mexican heritage, right? Like Trump doesn't see people; he only sees like white Christians as fundamentally American. Everyone else, maybe you're okay if you like Donald Trump. If you're not, you're disloyal not only to Trump but to America. That's how he thinks. And it's an extremely dangerous worldview at a time where white nationalist domestic terrorism is on the rise and just happened a couple weeks ago.
And it's this in 2016, 71, according to Exit Poll, 71% of American Jews voted for Hillary Clinton. That number was 79% in the 2018 midterms. It's been around that 70% number for a long time. So he's essentially saying that 7 in 10 American Jews are disloyal and dumb. Because the original comment was that that they're either disloyal or ignorant to explain their support of Democrats.
Yeah.
And we're just moving on. Like we're just like, this happened. It happened like 36 hours ago. We're on to the Greenland thing and everything else. And we're just going to move right past the president attacking with anti-Semitic trope the Jewish community in America. Yeah,
and look, a bunch of people noted if Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden had said this would be the end of their campaigns. The media would never let it go. It would be covered as the biggest thing that ever happened. It would not last a day or two. It would go on and on and on. But because Donald Trump does 5 of these things per day, it was one of many headlines on the New York Times yesterday that was completely bonkers. But Trump
benefits from Trump benefits in the minds of the press from the fact that they think accurately that he's dumb. Right. So this is treated as a misstatement of someone who talks a lot and generally doesn't know what they're saying, as opposed to an actual window into anti-Semitism into his soul. And when you connect all the dots around this, right, you connect his very fine people comment about the neo-Nazi marchers in Charlottesville, the amount of times that he retweeted anti-Semitic memes during and after the campaign. When you combine it, and then you attach that to all the other examples of bigotry in his life and in his presidency, it paints a very clear picture. But instead, we treat this as just yet another thing Donald Trump said because he talks a lot.
It also illuminates a fundamental misunderstanding of his. Sorry, it also shows like his political strategy here is based on a fundamental misunderstanding, right? Which he thinks, and to be fair, a bunch of Republicans around him think that if they somehow cozy up to Bibi Netanyahu's government in Israel, then American Jews will say, oh, well, I don't want to vote for Democrats anymore because all I care about is what happens in Israel, which is anti-Semitic all on its own. As if Jews in this country wouldn't care about the fact that Donald Trump, after a rally where a bunch of people were marching with signs that said, Jews will not replace us, said there are very fine people on both sides. And all the other instances of anti-Semitism in his life, that like they wouldn't care about that. They would care, by the way, about him being nice to Bibi Netanyahu. I mean, it's so fucking, it's crazy, man.
Not to mention caring about providing health care to people or saving the planet or protecting people from gun violence, all the other issues that matter to people. But I think in Trump's mind, he thinks this way because he is such a fucking one-dimensional thinker. And the collection of numbskulls he has surrounded himself are the same way, which is to win election must win Florida. To win Florida must win Jews.
Yep.
There are lots of Jews in Florida, therefore I will do this. So I think that's how Trump thinks because he's basically Homer Simpson as president. Like it's not, the complicated thoughts do not work through that brain. But I think the smarter Republicans out there, and there are some, and they think about the strategy in the following ways. Yes, I do think that part of this, if to the extent there is strategy behind these rants, the painting Democrats as anti-Semitic is part of the same strategy as painting Democrats as pro-socialist. It is about Florida. It is the fact that there are older Jews in Florida, and the voting rates among older Jews are different than the voting rates among young. Sorry, let me try that again. Republicans do much better among older Jewish voters than younger Jewish voters. They do better among older voters than younger voters. And there is a disproportionate concentration of that electorate in Florida. And so if you can either hold on to or peel off some of those voters, you're going to do better in Florida. So that's part one. Part two is most of the Israel, the paying Democrats, the anti-Israel, the butting up to Bibi Netanyahu is about the evangelical vote in the rest of the country more so than it is about the Jewish vote.
Yeah.
Right. And then the third part about this is it is just yet another way to try to scare white people by trying to make by trying to take two Muslim women and make them the face of the Democratic Party. Right. So it's about Florida. It's about holding on to the evangelical vote, who have many reasons to have questions about Trump's own personal morality. And then it is about this idea that he thinks if he makes the Democratic Party seem less white, he will win the election.
Yeah, and just like everything else he does, it's not about them thinking they can win the Jewish vote in 2020, just like they don't think they can win the African-American vote or win the Latino vote. They just want to shave off some margins here for Democrats, and they don't care if you vote for Donald Trump or you stay home. Either one works for them. All they want to make sure is that the Democrat doesn't reach 50%. And the Democrat not reaching 50% or 50% plus one is because they didn't get high enough turnout among African-American voters or Latino voters or Jewish voters, right? Like they're trying to sort of peel off their constituencies just a little bit here so that Donald Trump can again, probably lose the popular vote but win the Electoral College, and you have just enough people staying home or voting for third parties. That's the whole strategy here, right?
Yep.
All right, let's talk about the end of Donald Trump's latest flirtation with gun control. Not even a month after two of the worst mass shootings in recent history, all it took was one 30-minute phone call from the NRA to scare the president away from supporting legislation to expand background checks. Trump gave the following reasoning to reporters on Wednesday, quote, "I have to tell you that it's a mental problem," and, quote, "they call it the slippery slope, and all of a sudden, everything gets taken away," which, of course, is a longtime NRA talking point. Dan, are you even a bit surprised here?
John, I think it's unlikely that Dean Baquet is going to let me write New York Times headlines, but you know what my headline for this would have been?
What's that?
No shit, Sherlock. I mean, we've seen this. This is now the third time this has happened in the less than 3 years that Trump's been president. We have a tragic mass shooting, first in Las Vegas, then at Parkland, and then earlier this month in El Paso and Dayton. And every time Trump says the right thing or considers the right thing early, the NRA gets involved and nothing happens. This is the cycle we are in. It is because we are a country with a politics that was broken by a Republican Party who cares more about winning elections than stopping people from getting killed.
What do you think this says about the NRA's influence, even as they're engulfed in multiple scandals? We talked a couple pods ago about how they were outraised and out-organized in 2018 by gun safety groups for the first time. So, it had seemed like maybe the NRA's influence was waning, and then something like this happens, and with one 30-minute phone call, they get, an entire gun safety agenda killed.
Every time one of these shootings happens, a bunch of people on Twitter will tweet at every Republican member of Congress who blocks gun control, which is every Republican member of Congress. We will tweet at them the amount of money they took from the NRA.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important point to make, and we should continue to make it. But I also think it has the danger of oversimplifying the politics of this. Because the NRA, what they have brought to the table is less about the money that they give candidates and more about the money they spend to win elections. And I think that the politics of this of being for, and we'll talk about this as it relates to Trump in a minute, but the politics of this it's pretty easy. You could be for issues that have 60-some% support among Republicans and 90% support around the country. Like, that's easy. But what prevents it from happening is fear. It's fear of a primary challenge, right? It is fear of getting attacked from the right, because even though they are a minority, the pro-gun voters, the NRA voters, essentially, are very well organized. and they turn out to vote. And so these Republicans fear that if they do the right thing, they will get primaried in their next election and lose. Because even if it's the right move for the general election, and even if the right move for their party writ large, in a more narrow primary universe, they could get killed for it.
Yeah, if you're Donald Trump, you also want the NRA to be spending as much money as possible on 2020, whether it's organizing, whether it's ads. And by the way, some of these ads that the NRA runs, they're not about guns because they know that's not as popular. They'll run ads about immigration. They'll run ads about, attacking the Democratic candidate for all kinds of stuff. They don't give a shit. They're just another interest group that's going to spend a fuckload of money on the election, and Trump doesn't want to piss them off. You're absolutely right. Like it is dangerously oversimplifying the politics to just say so-and-so got a couple $1,000s for the NRA, and that's why they vote the way they do. Because that's not necessarily the case. You're right. It is fear. They have built an organization that has scared a bunch of politicians because they have a lot of money to run ads, to organize on the ground, to disseminate propaganda, which they do very well. Like it's just another big, expensive right-wing organization.
And we should just point out exactly what the NRA is, because they brand themselves as this group of citizens, hunters and sportsmen and hobbyists. That's not what they are.
No.
They are a lobbying group for gun manufacturers. The reason their ads are about immigration is it is in their interest to scare people into thinking this country is dangerous and they need to protect themselves with a gun, even though all studies say that makes you less safe than if you were to not have a gun. And so that is what this is about. Everything that they do is about selling more guns so that they can get more money from the gun manufacturers. And the Republicans want the money from the gun manufacturers laundered through the NRA. And so this is about electoral preservation more than anything else.
I will say, looking at 2020, this may not have been the politically smartest move by Donald Trump. There was a new AP poll out this morning that says only 7 in 10 Republicans approve of how he's handling gun policy, which is the lowest rating from his own party on any issue. Obviously, in Democrats and independents, by large majorities, think he's not handling gun policy well. We've talked a million times about, the overwhelming majorities of people who are for background checks, assault weapons bans, all the rest of it. Trump, who is having particular trouble with women, suburban women, even, by the way, non-college educated women, white women, which is new this time around, having trouble with all these groups. And, I actually would, if he had passed background checks, I'd be a little, I think that would have helped him politically a little bit.
Yeah, it would have been a home run for him on the following vectors. As you point out, suburban voters are his biggest problem. That's where the biggest drop-off has been since the Republican Party in 2012. This is an issue that matters a ton in the suburbs. His second issue is he's basically seen as ineffective, because he's too busy engaging in Twitter wars to get things done. And the third problem is that he ran as someone who was going to be an independent voice who was not captive to special interests, and he has been just livid. He's been the king of the swamp for the last 3 years. And so this would have dealt with all three things. Dealt with something that matters to voters, would have been able to say, I brought Democrats and Republicans to pass background checks, something that Barack Obama could not do. Right? That is a powerful message to a target group of voters for him. And the third, he would get to say that he bucked the NRA, that he stood up against strong voices in his own party. Like, that is political gold. And he was just too dumb or too scared to take it on, because if he were to do it, it would have helped him with voters, but hurt him with his key advisors. And by his key advisors, I mean the people who are on Fox from 8 to 11.
So what do Democrats do now? On Wednesday, March for Our Lives released probably the most ambitious, comprehensive gun safety proposal we've seen in this race yet. How do we get it passed?
Win.
I
mean, I think right now, so you're angry right now. What you do? You can give money to March for Our Lives, Moms Demand. Let me try again. You're angry right now. You can give money or volunteer for March for Our Lives, Moms Demand, Gabby Gifford's group, do all of that to help them, because that's also going to help organize voters for 2020, but also help pass these laws at the state level, which is incredibly important. We have to win in 2020. And then, we've said this before, but if we take the presidency and we take the Senate, the only way we're going to get common sense gun safety laws in this country is to eliminate the filibuster.
which Mitch McConnell knows, which is why he wrote an op-ed in today's New York Times about why the Democrats should be very careful about wanting to get rid of the filibuster, because, Mitch McConnell thinks the filibuster is very important, and he would never shake up the Senate or violate any norms and institutions and rules, because Mitch McConnell, he's a defender of the Senate, Dan.
I mean, really, the person most responsible for the completely fucked up situation this country is in right now is Mitch McConnell.
It's also important to know that, Mitch McConnell has basically gotten what he needs out of the Senate, in that he has eliminated the filibuster, or the filibuster no longer exists for judicial nominations at all. And what the Republicans care about is cuts to benefits, tax cuts, and putting right-wing judges on the bench. And you now don't need the filibuster for any of those things. So there's very few. There's definitely some things that if there were no filibuster, Republicans would be able to do if they had control of government, for sure. But the most important things to them, the things that get them up in the morning, cutting taxes, cutting benefits, and putting conservative judges on the bench, they can do that without the filibuster.
If anyone thinks that if Trump wins the White House and the Republicans keep the Senate, that Mitch McConnell is going to keep the filibuster, they are fucking clueless. Mitch McConnell held up Merrick Garland because of his long-held principles about allowing voters to pick Supreme Court justices. Then, basically was asked whether he would do the same thing with Trump as president. He said no. He is not a man of his word, and I do not give a fuck what all the Capitol Hill reporters who love Mitch McConnell and believe in the legend of Mitch McConnell think. He is a cynical, dishonest, anti-democratic force in this country, and there are lots of things they can and would do. The pressure, even if Mitch McConnell didn't want to limit the filibuster, do you think a newly reelected Trump, that Mitch McConnell's going to stand up to him and hold him back if there's something they want to do that they can't get done?
No way.
No.
And they'll all feel emboldened. The Republicans win again. Trump wins again. They're not going to be scared. All these senators that are come on. They're also maybe not going to need it for a while either.
It's so absurd. So Mitch McConnell, in his piece today, said, well, Harry Reid did this, so I was forced to just take it to its natural conclusion and eliminate the filibuster for the Supreme Court. Let's just imagine for a second. Mitch McConnell has stolen the seat from Barack Obama. Trump wins. The filibuster is still in place for judicial nominations. Democrats filibuster Neil Gorsuch because Mitch McConnell stole a Supreme Court seat from the American people who selected Barack Obama. And you think Mitch McConnell should be like, norms. Just going to go with 8 Supreme Court justices for now. Or you know what? I feel like it's so important to have 9. Let's just put Merrick Garland on the court. No, he would have eliminated the filibuster in 2 fucking seconds and put on Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, anyone else.
Yeah. Michael Bennett disagrees with us, but I think Mitch McConnell would have blown that thing up in a second.
He doesn't even disagree with that. He sort of acknowledged that Mitch McConnell would do that when I talked to him about that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, he did. He just...
I bullied him into that position, essentially, or badgered him, probably the better word, but...
We love Michael Bennett. All right, so after Trump said no to gun safety, he said yes to indefinite detentions for families and children who are fleeing violence and seeking asylum. The administration unveiled a rule this week that, if it survives court challenges, would supersede an old court settlement known as the Flores Agreement that limits the detention of children to 20 days. This announcement came after Customs and Border Patrol said that families currently in detention centers will not be given the flu shot, despite the fact that 3 children have died of the flu already. And on Wednesday, the president also told reporters that he's seriously considering eliminating birthright citizenship through an executive order, even though it's a right that's explicitly spelled out in the U.S. Constitution. He first floated that in towards the end of the 2018 midterms. Now it's back. Dan, let's start with the Flores Agreement. Why does Trump want to get rid of this court settlement, and what's the administration's argument here?
Whenever there's a question about Trump's immigration policy, it's always important to harken back to the comment from Atlantic columnist Adam Serwer, which is the cruelty is the point.
Yeah.
Right. That's why they want to do this, because it's cruel. They argue it's about detention. They argue it's about deterrence, but it's not. They argue that the Trump administration argues for their immigration policy as deterrence the same way that death penalty advocates argue for the death penalty as a deterrent. It's not. The point is punishment.
Right. Yeah, because look, you could try other ways to deter immigration that do not involve keeping people locked up indefinitely, children indefinitely, cutting legal immigration as they're doing, the public charge rule that we spoke about. Now, not allowing anyone to seek asylum who's traveled through a third country from their home country. That rule went into effect this week. Let's remember, just a few weeks ago, they held an 18-year-old American citizen for weeks because they suspected that he was undocumented in horrible, horrible conditions. They held an American citizen, and it was not the first time that they did that either. So, yeah, I don't think you're telling us this is about fucking deterrence.
And just a side note, it's not just cruel. Their policies are also stupid. They are not giving flu shots to the people in these detention centers, as if there was no history of large groups of people in temporary facilities infecting each other with diseases and then spreading out across the country. That's exactly how the fucking 1918 influenza epidemic happened. It is just so stupid because that is somehow they see giving people flu shots as weakness, as if people are going to flee Central America, go on a dangerous march across Mexico, come to the U.S. border to get a fucking flu shot.
Yeah, it's, it does seem like this is, the cruelty is the point, but also this is a political strategy, right? Like they want these announcements. It's clear they have a long list of things, and you could tell when the president was asked about birthright citizenship, and he said, "Oh, how do you know we were considering that? That's very good. Yeah, we've been seriously looking at that. We're looking at all kinds of things." Like, you just know that Stephen Miller has a long list right now of anti-immigrant, xenophobic policies and rules they can take through executive action that they want to roll out from now until November of 2020, and I'm sure a bunch of them will happen in the fall of 2020 when everyone's paying attention to the election because, again, Trump's whole bet here is that he can make this election about an invasion, about an immigrant invasion, and he wants to scare people, and he wants to say that Democrats care about undocumented immigrants, and I care about hardworking Americans, right? Who, by the way, happen to be white.
Tommy made this point on Twitter, but I think it really explains everything about the mentality of the Trump administration and the message of the Republican Party in 2020, which is the reason the term indefinite detention sounds so familiar to people is because that is the policy that the Bush administration put in place to deal with members of al-Qaeda and the Taliban.
Yeah. And
the reason why that matters is because it speaks to the fact that they believe the invasion rhetoric. They believe the infestation rhetoric, that this is ultimately a war for America's white soul. And they want people to think that. And the more they can do things like use indefinite detention, send the military to the border, talk about walls, that's all about creating this idea that it is a war for American culture. And it is an important point that is basically ripped from the manifesto of the El Paso shooter. It is the rhetoric that permeates 8chan and these other white supremacist sites. It is, it is what it is, which is the Republican Party has become a white nationalist party. It is in degrees from Trump and Stephen Miller down to others, but ultimately when your electoral strategy is you need to fire up as many white voters as possible and via laws and disinformation campaigns and other strategies disincentivize as many voters of color to participate, then you are a white nationalist party.
Yeah, because, again, there's a way to talk about the influx of asylum seekers at the border in a way that doesn't sort of evoke this idea of an invasion, right? Like, you could imagine another administration, probably a Democratic administration, but even a Republican administration, talking about it and saying, look, we have this influx of asylum seekers at the border. We are a nation of immigrants. We do respect the asylum laws internationally in this country. Right now, our system is overwhelmed. We need more resources at the border so that we can deal with these claims. We want to make sure that people belong here that are granted asylum, get asylum. People who don't deserve asylum don't get it. we're going to do this. We're going to secure our border in the meantime. Like, there's a whole bunch of ways to talk about this as a problem that we have to deal with that doesn't use the invasion rhetoric. They're using the invasion rhetoric because for political reasons. That's why it's in all their ads. That's why it's in all the Facebook ads. That's why it's in all their campaign ads. This is a political strategy right now. So, finally, let's talk about what may be the real cause of Trump's meltdown this week, which is his intense anxiety over mounting signs that the economy may be headed towards a recession, anxiety that has led him to blame the Federal Reserve, blame the media, blame the Democrats, acknowledge that he's postponing more Chinese tariffs because they'll hurt American consumers, and float that he's considering more tax cuts. At the same time, Trump is also telling us that the economy is the strongest it's ever been, that we don't really need any economic stimulus after all, and that he's winning his trade war, which he had to wage, because in the president's words, quote, "I am the chosen one."
I mean, this is an audio medium, so you can't really get the beauty of it that he also pointed at the sky when he said that.
He did. Clearly a joke, but also maybe not a joke in his mind. So what's with the mixed messages on the economy here? What's going on with that?
John, are you saying that you yourself have written many an economic speech, and you're an expert in messaging. Are you saying that a message that is the economy is working, the Fed has broken the economy is great, the media is destroying the economy, we're winning the China trade war, but we have to eliminate the tariffs so it doesn't hurt people, is not a coherent message?
It would be tough to write a speech with all those messages. I will admit that. I don't know that if I'd get that all in one message box.
Well, I mean, there is this sort of window into Trump's brain always, because like the distance between his brain and his mouth is so short, which is we're watching him in real time wrestle with a serious political problem, which is he ran around touting his economic success as the reason why voters should support him, even if they are uncomfortable with his rhetoric or his other policies, right? Which is, the economy's going great. I didn't fuck it up. Stick with me. And so, like, he sort of hung his hat on that, and now we're seeing that collapse around him. And he's sort of trying to find the right way to explain it, deal with it, et cetera. And he doesn't have a strategy. He doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have a team of smart people around him to help him come up with one. So it's just sort of vomit things until he gets the right amount of applause and sort of thinks he's hit on something. I do think that what he ultimately, where there can be success in that completely convoluted, inconsistent message is he doesn't need to convince everyone about the state of the economy. What he needs to do is create permission structure for some group of voters to stick with him because he has successfully convinced them that it's someone else's fault, right? Like, most people don't know who the Fed chair is, don't know who the Fed chair does, don't care. Most people think it's absurd that the New York Times or mainstream media in general, a business whose economics are shaky to say the least, have the power to control the economy. Because if they did, they would be doing much better. We'd have, local newspapers. But he just needs to convince some people, a small group of people, that it's someone else's fault. And that is a sense where Trump really does have some natural political ability, where he understands identity politics, where there are people who want to be with Trump. And if he can just give them enough of a reason to hang on to that, to stick with their political tribe, that they will do that. And I think that's what this is about.
Yeah, and I think, he'll have some success convincing a small group of people that are his biggest supporters and fans in his base that that's the case. He could have a little more trouble with most other voters. I do think the added problem he has is, we've said this before, presidents tend to get credit for the economy when the economy is doing well, get blamed for the economy when the economy is doing poorly. And some of that credit and blame are both not really deserved because the president doesn't have a ton of control over the economy and economic cycles. But for this specific case, it does seem like it is Trump's trade war that he started on his own that is at least contributing to a potential economic downturn. And Trump has also passed a giant tax cut, most of which went to the wealthiest corporations and Americans, very unpopular. And that at the very least, hasn't done anything to help the economy long term like they promised it would. So his only two economic policies, his tax cut and his trade war, have failed. And now we're in a recession. So I think that's an added challenge for him, or there would be an added challenge for any president in his position.
And I will say it makes it harder to blame other people when you designate yourself the chosen one, or you said on the convention day that I alone can fix it.
Yes.
Right. He pitches himself as some sort of political messiah or savior, and therefore he potentially, we hope, will be held to account for that in a way that other people who make more nuanced arguments about the economy and politics would be.
So he floated. Well, the White House also floated a payroll tax cut. I think on Wednesday he said, no, we're not considering that anymore. What's a payroll tax cut, and why do you think he proposed it?
Well, a payroll tax cut is a cut in your payroll taxes, which go to Social Security and Medicare. In 2010, when we were trying to help a struggling economy, we ended up working with Republicans to put in place a 2% payroll tax cut, which puts your paycheck is bigger, right? 2% bigger, essentially. And it is a well-known way of stimulating the economy, which is put money in people's pockets, more money in the economy. Economy should grow. Economy grows, more people hire. So the problem with it for Trump is Republicans, after initially agreeing to Obama's payroll tax cut as part of a deal, tried to tank it because they thought it would help his reelection. And most Republicans are on record complaining about the damage it does to Social Security because that 2% comes out of your contributions to Social Security and Medicare, as I understand it.
Yeah, so Republicans are on record as opposing this in the past. Of course, that won't stop them from switching if Trump decides to go forward, I'm sure. But it does seem like there's no universe where Donald Trump and the Republican Party just put up a payroll tax cut on its own with nothing else. And already it seems like they have other tax cuts in mind as well. One of them, a tax cut idea, is basically an executive order to cut capital gains taxes. So, which would basically cut capital gains taxes by $102 billion over the next decade. And it's a tax cut that would give the top 1% of Americans 86% of that benefit. Another tax cut for rich people. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, because as we know, the people who are truly suffering in this economy are the wealthiest. And so we need a potentially unconstitutional bailout of rich people. It seems like a winning message, if you ask me.
Honestly, I'm like, please let them do this. Fucking go for it. Please try to unilaterally, without an act of Congress, cut taxes for the wealthiest Americans as we're heading into a recession. Go for it. It is, I cannot imagine. You've seen polling your whole life. I have. We just did a poll in Wisconsin. I cannot imagine a more politically damaging thing for Donald Trump to do than cut capital gains taxes as the economy looks like it's heading into a recession on his own through an executive order that will probably be overturned by the courts.
Do you think he would use the much derided pen or the phone to do this unilateral executive action?
I mean, it's just like so much for like Trump, the fucking working class nationalist hero, the Trump, the economic populist. The country is heading towards a recession. What does he do? Cut some taxes for the richest investors in the country. I couldn't even believe that I was reading it. Like, you got to know that, like, Kellyanne Conway, who is awful for a million reasons, but knows how to read a poll, thinks that's a good idea.
I don't know. I feel like something in her has been broken somewhere over the years. So it's possible that she does not know that.
That's possibly true. But I do think that, this whole story about Trump and the economy is sort of all the things we've talked about today, maybe the most fertile ground for Democrats to make an argument. And again, the argument is not just let's watch the stock market and let's watch the economic indicators, and when they're bad, say Trump is bad, and when they're good, shy away from this. Make an argument about Trump's economic policies and what they have done. And don't just rely on, the headlines about the health of the economy. Rely on the statistics about how people are struggling in this economy with stagnant wages, with high healthcare costs, with high tuition costs, and all the rest. Because there's a good argument to be made, whether we head into a downturn or don't head into a downturn, that Trump's economic policies have hurt the vast, vast majority of Americans, except for his rich friends and corporations.
Yeah, like, let's just try this one on for our size, Democrats. Under Donald Trump, corporations have never paid, let me go this again. Under Donald Trump, corporations never made more money or paid less in taxes, but the cost of your health care, college, food, retirement have all gone up. Amazon, you pay more for your Amazon Prime subscription than Amazon pays in federal taxes. If you think that's a good idea, vote for Donald Trump. If you want something different, vote for a Democrat.
I realize this is, might be a boring argument to some people listening to this, but to a lot of people in this country, I think it would be very effective. Very effective. All right, let's end with a quick 2020 segment. This week, Julian Castro became the 10th Democrat to make the September debate stage. Jay Inslee dropped out of the race on Wednesday night. And John Hickenlooper decided to enter the Colorado Senate race. Beyond those developments, it's a pretty stable primary with about 6 months to go. Joe Biden has a small but persistent lead in all of the early state polls. Elizabeth Warren is gaining on him in Iowa and New Hampshire. Bernie Sanders is close behind her or slightly ahead in some polls. And then Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Cory Booker, and Beto O'Rourke are in single digits behind them. Dan, why do you think the race is so stable?
We've had this conversation both on the pod and off the pod, and it feels like a gazillion things have happened because because in the Trump era, every day feels like a week and a week feels like a year. It feels like this race has been going on forever, but it is still incredibly early. And while I think Joe Biden has certainly shown strength and the race is very stable, I would like to read to you the CNN USA Today Gallup poll from basically exactly 16 years ago today. Joe Lieberman was winning the Democratic primary with 23% of the vote. Dick Gephardt was coming in second with 13%. Howard Dean had just surged to third with 12%, and John Kerry had 10%. And so my point here is the fact that the race has not changed very much between when everyone got in early this year and August of the off year is actually not unusual, right? Yeah. And we don't remember that being a big deal because 2003 was back before Apple, Facebook, and Google broke the American cortex with dopamine injections via the smartphone. And so it just felt like no one paid attention to the race yet. But now we see it, feel it, hear it all the time. But most voters haven't tuned in yet. That doesn't mean the race is going to change. I mean, it could stay exactly the same, but it's not the stability is actually historically less unusual than I assumed until I went back and looked at the numbers.
So the Biden campaign is been out there this week. They've been making an electability argument the whole time, but they've really been driving it home this week. Biden went up with his first ad in Iowa, I believe. Maybe it was in some other early states, but I know it was in Iowa. And then Dr. Jill Biden was out there, and she said, quote, "Your candidate might be better on, healthcare than Joe is, but you've got to look at who's going to win this election. And maybe you have to swallow a little bit and say, okay, I personally like so-and-so better, but your bottom line has to be that we have to beat Trump." Just about as explicit as you can be on electability. What did you think about the Biden campaign leaning so heavily on this?
Well, there's no question that both from polling and just anecdotally, Democrats are obsessed with beating Trump for good reason. Trump is very bad. And so people want the person they think can best beat Trump. And polls show, for a variety of unproven reasons right now, that voters think Biden is that person. And so that is his strongest argument. I do think the Biden campaign is selling Joe Biden short by making that the only reason. He is someone with a long career, a lot of accomplishments within his career before, but also within the Obama administration he can talk about. He is a good person. He is a good politician. And I think, electability should be subtext. And they have made it the text of the entire campaign. And maybe that could work. I mean, there is some strategists would say just lean into your strongest argument for as long as you possibly can. But I think if the answer is you may not like Joe Biden, but you should take him because he's the only one who can win, I think that's a hard message to sell over a long, sustained period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that the flip side of the poll that you read from 2000, summer of 2003, that showed Kerry at the bottom of the pack there, is in the fall when Kerry was sort of written off for dead. The way that I was on that campaign, the way that we came back and beat Howard Dean, who was leading in the polls in the fall of 03 and into the winter of 03, was with an electability argument. And the reason that John Kerry's electability argument was so powerful is that, like right now, in 2004, sort of the emotion that pervaded the entire electorate was fear that George W. Bush, who people thought was the worst president in their lifetime at the time, would win again. And people and voters again were thinking like, I'm happy to hear all these candidates. Howard Dean seems inspiring, but what we really need to do is beat George W. Bush. And John Kerry rode that electability argument all the way to the nomination. Now, I know, then he lost. But in Democratic primaries, especially at a time where there's an incumbent Republican president who a ton of Democrats, all Democrats hate with a passion and are very afraid to see win again, electability is a really strong argument. And the reason I bring this up is that I do think Joe Biden's opponents, if they want to beat him eventually, have to sort of respect voters' fears and voters' desire for someone who can beat Trump and make electability arguments of their own. I don't think you should lead with electability arguments. I don't think they should dominate the debate. I don't even think you need to have them right now as much. But subtly, slowly, I think each of these candidates has to tell voters why they're going to be the most electable Democrat. What do you think of that?
Yeah.
Am I crazy?
I think no, it's not. It's not crazy. I still believe electability is better shown, not told. Right?
Yes,
and you demonstrate
I totally agree
electability by running a really good campaign, by having a message that people like, by turning out crowds, by demonstrating competence on the stump and in the debate. And yes, you were on that campaign. I was not. Voters picked Kerry in large part because they believed he was the most electable. But Dean also raised questions about his own electability down the stretch.
Yeah, he did.
Right. He had some, basically he had sort of existed in a different media environment without as much scrutiny. And when the scrutiny kicked in and he was the front runner, he didn't respond well to that scrutiny. He had some awkward exchanges and some tense exchanges at town halls. And then to the extent that he had a chance to bounce back in a state like New Hampshire. So to be clear, Kerry won Iowa. Dean did not. Dean had been very strong in New Hampshire in the polling to date because he was from Vermont. I know Kerry was also from nearby Massachusetts, but Dean had shown strength. But Dean's had a meltdown on election caucus night, and that essentially destroyed his campaign. And so the lesson from that, you can take two lessons, right? One is Kerry said he was the most electable, showed he was and therefore won. Dean also gave people a reason to question his electability. And so, for someone like Warren, who tops a lot of polls as people's favorite choice, as the highest approval, or is seen as the most qualified, or first choice for president, or whatever, yet has been dogged, at least in the media, by questions of electability and doesn't poll as well on that measure. She can show she's electable by running a great campaign, which she has done to date, in winning Iowa, right? Hillary Clinton also ran in a very different environment on electability message and then lost Iowa, and the bottom fell out of her electability message. And so just run a good campaign is the best way to be seen as electable.
And I will say that even in that campaign, when she was seen as the electable one and Obama was the, take a chance on what you really believe candidate, we started making sort of subtle electability arguments and trying to show electability. One with, like you said, showing the enthusiastic crowds, right? Like if Barack Obama's the nominee, these are the kind of crowds you're going to get in the general election. And I think that was powerful to people. And, he would also, I remember in the Jefferson Jackson dinner, he said, if I'm the nominee, my opponent's not going to be able to say that I voted for George Bush's war in Iraq, using the fact that he opposed the war in Iraq and Hillary Clinton supported it as a reason that he might be more electable because he has a contrast, right? So there's a million different ways to sort of subtly make electability arguments to people that aren't just check out the polls, I'm the one who's beating Trump by the most.
Right. It's live by the polls, die by the polls is the problem.
Yeah, I would say that to everyone. What do you think could possibly shake up the race in the coming months? Got a couple debates. Got some people starting to run ads on television. What do you think?
The early state polls in Iowa in particular are leading indicators of where the race is going, because that's where where the voters have the greatest engagement with the candidates, where they see them in person. It's where they're going to start seeing ads. It's where they consume local media that is less process-oriented than the national media. And so, if we see a Des Moines Register poll, for instance, which is, I think, the only Iowa poll I think can truly grab the political media by the throat and have it change a narrative. But if we see a Des Moines Register poll in September, October, whenever the next one comes out, and Elizabeth Warren is leading, I think that will change how everyone thinks about the race. It'll mean more scrutiny for her, right? It'll potentially undermine, at least temporarily, Joe Biden's primary argument for himself to date. And it'll change the general dynamics of the race, because right now we live in this world where Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris's staff fight 24/7 about Medicare for all, just like in some sort of Twitter war. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris go after each other on the debate stage. Julian Castro and Cory Booker go after other people, and no one goes after Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
She is not, no one, I think it's fear, because both that she is very good and very popular, but the candidate who has risen the fastest in the polls, who seems the most likely to be the nominee if the nominee is not Joe Biden, is the person that no one wants to engage with. And if she takes the lead, that will change that dynamic, and then we'll have to see how that plays itself out.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. It is interesting that no one has really engaged Elizabeth Warren on anything, on her policies, on anything else. And it seems unlikely that she can go through the entire primary in that situation. She might be able to handle it really well, but then that's the test, right? Can you handle the attacks when they're incoming? Okay, when we come back, we will have Dan's interview with Stacey Abrams.